The piercing wail of sirens cut through the cheerful carnival music like a blade through silk. Children's laughter died in their throats as the massive Ferris wheel groaned to a sudden halt, leaving riders suspended in their rainbow-colored gondolas against the August sky. Parents grabbed their children's hands with white-knuckled urgency, their eyes wide with the kind of primal fear that spreads through crowds like wildfire. The Thunder Mountain roller coaster's emergency brakes engaged with a metallic shriek that made everyone within 100 yards flinch. "Everyone, stay calm." The voice crackled through emergency megaphones as police cruisers poured through the main gates of Wonderland Amusement Park. Their red and blue lights painted the pastel-colored facades of game booths and snack stands in an ominous strobe that transformed the magical kingdom into something from a nightmare. Officers in tactical gear jogged past families clutching cotton candy and stuffed animals, their boots heavy on the decorative brick pathways that had been designed to transport visitors to a world of pure joy. Marcus Johnson, 17 years old, and still catching his breath from the excitement of finally convincing his younger sister Keisha to ride the tornado drop, watched the chaos unfold with growing confusion. His dark skin gleamed with a light sheen of sweat in the afternoon heat, and his Atlanta Hawks jersey clung to his lean frame. The bright yellow of his inhaler case caught the light as he shifted it from one hand to the other, a nervous habit he'd developed since childhood. The EpiPen in his cargo shorts pocket felt heavier than usual, a constant reminder of the severe peanut allergy that had shaped much of his young life. "Marcus, what's happening?" Keisha tugged at his arm, her voice small and frightened. At 12, she still believed that bad things only happen to other people, in other places. Her braided hair bounced as she looked around frantically, trying to make sense of why their perfect day had suddenly turned into something scary. "I don't know. Baby girl?" Marcus pulled her closer, his protective instincts kicking in as he scanned the crowd for their parents. "But we're gonna find Mom and Dad. Okay, stay right next to me." The Johnson family had saved for months to afford this trip to Wonderland, the state's premier amusement park. Marcus's father, David, worked double shifts at the auto plant, while his mother, Patricia, cleaned offices at night after her day job at the grocery store. This vacation represented sacrifice and hope, a chance to give their children memories that would last a lifetime. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus, that their dream day was now dissolving into something that felt increasingly like a nightmare. Karen Whitfield stood near the tilt-a-whirl, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping her designer purse with the intensity of someone clutching a life preserver. Her blonde hair, styled into what she considered a sophisticated bob, had begun to wilt in the humidity, but her indignation remained as crisp as her pressed khaki capris. She'd been waiting in line for 23 minutes because of some technical difficulty, watching her vacation time tick away while her husband Richard played on his phone and her twin 8-year-old boys complained about being bored. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she'd muttered to the teenage ride operator, a pale kid with acne who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Do you have any idea how much we paid for these tickets? We drove 4 hours to get here, and your incompetent staff can't even keep the rides running." The ride operator, whose name tag read Tyler, had apologized for the third time when Karen noticed Marcus. He was about 30 feet away, helping Keisha out of the tornado drop safety harness. And something about the scene triggered every prejudice that Karen had been carefully cultivating for her 42 years of suburban existence. A black teenager, sweating, breathing heavily, reaching into his pocket for something she couldn't quite see. Karen's imagination, fueled by cable news, fear-mongering, and social media echo chambers, immediately began constructing a narrative that transformed an innocent family outing into something sinister. When Marcus pulled out his inhaler and took a quick puff to manage the excitement-induced tightness in his chest, Karen saw something entirely different. The yellow plastic looked suspicious to her. The way he handled it seemed furtive. The fact that he was black in a space she considered primarily white made everything about his presence feel threatening. "Richard!" she hissed at her husband, who looked up from his fantasy football app with the expression of a man who had learned to recognize when his wife was about to make a scene. "Look at that boy over there, by the tower ride." Richard Whitfield, a tax attorney whose greatest aspiration was to avoid confrontation, followed his wife's gaze with growing dread. He knew that tone. He'd heard it in grocery stores when she demanded to speak to managers, in restaurants when she sent back perfectly acceptable meals, and at their son's Little League games when she argued with umpires. "Karen, whatever you're thinking, please just..." "He's got some kind of device. I saw him use it. Chemical, probably. Look how many children are around here." Karen's voice rose with each word, carrying the authoritative tone she'd perfected through years of HOA board meetings and PTA disputes. "This is exactly how they do it. They target family venues, places where people feel safe." The "they" in Karen's worldview was fluid, adaptable to whatever minority group happened to trigger her anxiety at any given moment. Today, it was a black teenager whose only crime was existing in a space where she felt entitled to comfort and control. The prescription bottle in his other pocket, containing emergency medication that could literally save his life, became evidence of some imagined plot in Karen's increasingly agitated mind. "I'm calling the police." She already had her phone out, her thumb hovering over the emergency call button. "This is a terrorist attack waiting to happen." "Karen." "No." Richard grabbed her wrist, but she shook him off with the fury of someone whose righteousness had been questioned. "You don't know what you're seeing. He's just a kid with his family." "Exactly. They use kids because people don't suspect them. Haven't you been paying attention to the news?" Karen's finger jabbed at the screen. The call connected immediately. 911, what's your emergency?" Karen's voice transformed, taking on the breathless urgency of someone reporting an active crisis. "I'm at Wonderland Amusement Park, and there's a suspicious person here with what looks like chemical dispensing devices. He's been spraying something into the air near the children's rides. This could be a biological terrorism attack." The 911 operator, trained to treat every call as potentially legitimate, began asking follow-up questions. Karen provided Marcus's location with the precision of a military spotter, describing his clothing, his approximate age, and inventing details about suspicious behavior that existed only in her imagination. She mentioned seeing him coordinate with other people, though Marcus had only been talking to his parents and sister. She claimed to have witnessed him testing equipment when he'd simply checked his phone for the time. Marcus, meanwhile, had finally spotted his parents near the funnel cake stand. Patricia Johnson's face lit up when she saw her children approaching, but her smile faltered when she noticed the police cars streaming through the park entrance. David set down his lemonade and instinctively moved closer to his family, his construction worker's instincts recognizing when a situation was about to get complicated. "What's all this about?" Patricia asked, her nurse's training making her automatically assess whether anyone appeared to be hurt. The crowd's energy felt wrong, charged with the kind of tension that usually preceded bad news. "Not sure yet," David replied, but his eyes were already tracking the officer's movements. As a black man who'd grown up in the South, he'd developed an early warning system for when law enforcement attention was headed in his direction. The way several officers seemed to be scanning the crowd rather than responding to a specific incident made his stomach tighten. The park's emergency protocols kicked into high gear with military precision. Within minutes, ride operators were shutting down attractions and directing guests toward exits. The cheerful ambient music that usually played throughout Wonderland was replaced by announcements requesting calm cooperation with the evacuation. Security guards who usually spent their shifts dealing with line jumpers and lost children suddenly found themselves coordinating with federal agents. Officer Jennifer Martinez was the first to spot Marcus. She'd been given a description over her radio that matched the teenager perfectly: black male, approximately 17, wearing an Atlanta Hawks jersey, carrying suspicious items. Her training had emphasized taking potential threats seriously, especially in high-population venues like amusement parks. The possibility that this might be a false alarm seemed less important than the possibility that hesitation could cost lives. "Excuse me," she called out as she approached the Johnson family. Her hand rested on her radio, ready to call for backup if needed. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Marcus felt his world shift slightly off its axis. He'd been laughing with Keisha about how the tornado drop had made her scream. And now, a police officer was walking toward him with the kind of focused attention that every black teenager learned to fear. "Yes, ma'am. We've received reports of suspicious activity in this area. I'm going to need to search your belongings." Officer Martinez's tone was professional, but firm, leaving no room for negotiation. David stepped forward, his protective instincts warring with his knowledge that challenging police officers often made situations worse. "Officer, what kind of suspicious activity? My son hasn't done anything wrong." "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back while I conduct this search." Martinez's hand moved closer to her weapon, a gesture that wasn't lost on David. The crowd around them had begun to notice the confrontation, phones appearing in hands as people prepared to document whatever was about to unfold. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he set down his backpack. Inside were the ordinary treasures of a teenage day: out his wallet with $37, a phone charger, sunscreen his mother had insisted he bring, and a small cooler bag containing his emergency medications. The inhaler in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "What's this?" Officer Martinez held up the inhaler, examining it as if it were evidence in a criminal trial. "It's my asthma inhaler," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have asthma and allergies." Patricia stepped forward, her maternal instincts overriding her caution. "Officer, my son has severe asthma and life-threatening allergies. Those are his prescribed medications. I have all the documentation." "Ma'am, please stay back." Martinez's radio crackled with reports from other officers searching the park. The tone of urgency in their voices suggested that this was being treated as a credible threat, not a simple misunderstanding. Karen watched the scene unfold from behind a row of carnival game booths, using her phone to record what she would later describe to news reporters as the moment when authorities prevented a terror attack. Her hands shook with adrenaline as she captured Marcus's face, zooming in on his expression of confusion and fear. In her mind, she was documenting history, preserving evidence of her own heroic intervention. "Richard, are you getting this?" she whispered to her husband, who was staring at the scene with growing horror. "This is going to be all over the news. We might have saved hundreds of lives." Richard looked at his wife as if seeing her clearly for the first time in their 15-year marriage. The excitement in her voice, the way she was almost trembling with the thrill of being at the center of drama, made him physically sick. "Karen, that's somebody's child. Look at his parents. Look at how scared they are." "They're probably in on it," Karen replied without taking her eyes off her phone screen. "These things are always family operations." The park's evacuation was proceeding with the organized chaos of a well-rehearsed emergency plan. Families streamed toward the exits, many carrying crying children who didn't understand why their fun day had ended so abruptly. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. Thousands of tickets refunded, concessions abandoned, gift shop merchandise left behind, as families prioritized getting to safety. Jake Morrison, Wonderland's general manager, paced in his office while fielding calls from corporate headquarters, local media, and increasingly panicked department heads. 23 years in the amusement park industry had taught him that bad publicity could destroy a business overnight, and the words "terrorist threat" were already appearing on social media posts from evacuated guests. "Sir, we need guidance on whether to issue refunds," his assistant said, standing in the doorway with a tablet full of rapidly accumulating problems. "Guest services is being overwhelmed with calls, and the hotels are reporting mass checkouts." "Issue the refunds," Jake said, running his hands through his graying hair. "And get me a meeting with legal. If this turns out to be a false alarm, we're going to need to figure out how to rebuild our reputation." The State Tourism Board's emergency hotline began ringing within an hour of the park's closure. Sarah Chen, the board's communications director, watched in real time as Yubang Wonderland Terror began trending on social media. Travel bloggers were already updating their posts, striking the park from recommended itineraries. Hotel booking sites showed a sudden spike in cancellations throughout the region. "How bad is it?" asked Tom Williams, the tourism board's director, as he rushed into Sarah's office after cutting short a Chamber of Commerce luncheon. "Catastrophic," Sarah replied, her laptop screen showing a cascade of negative mentions across every major platform. CNN just picked up the story. Fox News is running it as breaking news. The park's stock price has dropped 12% in the last 2 hours. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in the back of a police cruiser, his hands cuffed behind him as a precautionary measure, while officers waited for the hazmat team to analyze his medications. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same inhaler that helped him breathe was now being treated as potential evidence in a terrorism investigation. Through the car's window, he could see his parents talking animatedly with officers, Patricia gesturing toward the prescription bottle she'd pulled from her purse. "This is insane," Keisha said to anyone within earshot, her young voice carrying the clear moral authority that children sometimes possess. "Marcus isn't a terrorist. He's scared of spiders." The hazmat team arrived with the theatrical efficiency of a Hollywood production. White-suited figures with full respirators swept through the area where Marcus had been spotted, testing air samples and swabbing surfaces for traces of biological agents. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing every moment of the investigation for broadcast to an increasingly alarmed public. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the team's lead scientist, conducted her analysis with the methodical precision that had made her one of the state's most trusted experts in biological threats. She understood that her findings would either validate the evacuation or reveal it as a massive overreaction. Either way, people's lives hung in the balance of her scientific rigor. The preliminary results were conclusive. No biological agents, no chemical weapons, no traces of any substance that could pose a threat to human health. Marcus's inhaler contained exactly what its label claimed: albuterol sulfate, a standard bronchodilator prescribed to millions of Americans with asthma. His EpiPen contained epinephrine, the life-saving medication that could prevent his peanut allergy from killing him. "False alarm," Dr. Vasquez reported to the incident commander. Whatever the caller saw, it wasn't a biological threat. But false alarms, like broken eggs, cannot be easily unbroken. The damage had been set in motion with Karen's phone call, and now it would roll forward with the inexorable momentum of a boulder down a mountainside. News outlets had already committed to the story. Politicians had issued statements about vigilance against terrorism, and social media had crystallized around a narrative that would be impossible to completely reverse. The park's security director, Maria Santos, was reviewing surveillance footage when she noticed something that made her stomach drop. Camera angle 7, positioned near the tilt-a-whirl, showed a clear view of Karen making her phone call. But more importantly, it showed what happened in the minutes leading up to that call. The timestamp revealed that Karen had been watching Marcus for nearly 10 minutes before she decided he was a threat. "Pull up angle 12, Maria instructed her technician. "I want to see the wider shot of that same time period." What they discovered would change everything. The camera showed Karen not just observing Marcus, but actively moving closer to him, positioning herself to get a better view of his activities. More damning still, it showed her placing something near one of the trash cans close to where Marcus had been standing. "Enhance that section," Maria said, her voice tight with growing suspicion. "What did she drop there?" The enhanced footage revealed Karen removing a small plastic bag from her purse and discreetly placing it behind the trash can. The bag appeared to contain some kind of white powder, which she had presumably intended authorities to discover as evidence supporting her claims. It was premeditation captured in high definition, proof that Karen hadn't simply misunderstood what she was seeing, but had actively fabricated evidence to support a false accusation. Maria immediately called the FBI's field office, knowing that planting evidence to support a false terrorism report was a federal crime. Within hours, agents were at the park, securing the planted evidence and requesting all available surveillance footage. The investigation's focus shifted from Marcus to Karen, from preventing terrorism to prosecuting it. The revelation came too late to prevent the immediate economic devastation. By the time the truth emerged, Wonderland had already announced indefinite closure pending security upgrades. 300 employees received termination notices, their livelihoods sacrificed to corporate damage control. Local hotels reported occupancy rates plummeting from 90% to 18% overnight. Restaurants that depended on park visitors began laying off staff. The ripple effects spread throughout the state's tourism industry like a virus. Travel agencies removed the region from vacation packages. Convention planners began looking at alternative venues. The governor called an emergency meeting with tourism officials, economic development leaders, and law enforcement to address what was being called the worst crisis in the state's hospitality industry since Hurricane Katrina. "We're looking at potential losses in the hundreds of millions," reported Janet Foster, the state's chief economist. "Hotels, restaurants, gas stations, gift shops, local attractions, everything connected to tourism is being impacted. If this perception of danger persists, we could be looking at permanent job losses and business closures." Marcus, meanwhile, sat in his family's hotel room, watching news coverage of himself being described as both a victim of racial profiling and a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. He'd started the day excited about riding roller coasters and was ending it as the center of a national news story. "How does this happen?" Patricia asked, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "How does taking your medicine turn you into a terrorist suspect?" David wrapped his arms around his wife, his own anger carefully controlled in front of the children. He knew exactly how it happened. He'd lived his entire life knowing that his presence in certain spaces would be interpreted as threatening simply because of his race. What was new was seeing it happen to his son, seeing the next generation forced to navigate the same minefield of prejudice he'd hoped they might escape. The Johnson family's lawyer, Michael Roberts, arrived that evening with news that would begin to shift the narrative. The FBI has video evidence that the woman who called 911 planted fake evidence at the scene. They're preparing charges against her, and they want to make a public statement, clearing Marcus of any wrongdoing. But clearing Marcus's name was only part of the challenge. The economic damage was real, measurable, and spreading. Wonderland's parent company was already in discussions with potential buyers, considering selling the park rather than trying to rebuild its reputation. The brand had become toxic overnight, associated in the public mind with terrorism and fear rather than family fun. Karen Whitfield's arrest made headlines, but the coverage was complicated by the debate it sparked about racial profiling, false reporting, and the broader climate of suspicion that had made her accusations seem plausible to authorities. Her lawyer argued that she had acted in good faith, genuinely believing she was witnessing a threat. Prosecutors countered that the planted evidence proved intent to deceive. The trial, when it finally began 6 months later, became a national flashpoint for discussions about race, privilege, and the weaponization of law enforcement against minority communities. Karen's testimony revealed the depth of her prejudices, her genuine belief that Marcus's presence in a family entertainment venue constituted an inherent threat worth investigating. "I was trying to protect children," she insisted from the witness stand, her voice breaking with what seemed like genuine emotion. "I saw what I thought was dangerous behavior, and I did what any responsible citizen would do." Marcus's testimony was quieter, but more powerful. He described the feeling of having his ordinary teenage activities transformed into evidence of terrorism, of watching his parents' dreams of a perfect family vacation crumble under the weight of unfounded suspicion. He spoke about the months of therapy needed to process the trauma, the way he now hesitated before taking his medication in public spaces. "I just wanted to have fun with my sister," he said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "I never imagined that being black with asthma could make someone think I was a terrorist." The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on charges of filing false police reports, planting evidence, and making terroristic threats. Karen was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to the affected businesses and workers. The financial damages totaled over $40 million, a sum that would follow her family for the rest of their lives. But Marcus's story didn't end with Karen's conviction. The national attention his case had received opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. College recruiters reached out, impressed by his grace under pressure and articulate advocacy for civil rights. Scholarship offers arrived from universities across the country, many of them specifically created to support students who had faced racial discrimination. The Marcus Johnson Foundation, established with donations from people who had been moved by his story, began providing support for other young people who had been victims of racial profiling. His first public speaking engagement, at a conference on civil rights and criminal justice reform, drew a standing ovation that lasted for 5 minutes. "What happened to me was wrong," he told the audience, his voice carrying the moral authority that comes from surviving injustice with dignity intact. "But what matters now is making sure it doesn't happen to someone else. We have to change the systems that make these false accusations possible, that allow fear and prejudice to masquerade as public safety." Wonderland eventually reopened under new ownership, with Marcus as the guest of honor at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The park had implemented comprehensive bias training for all employees, established a civil rights advisory board, and created the Johnson Family Scholarship Program for local students pursuing careers in criminal justice reform. Standing on the platform where he'd been arrested 18 months earlier, Marcus looked out at the crowd of families, children clutching balloons and cotton candy, parents taking photos with Mickey Mouse and Superman. The sight filled him with something he hadn't expected: hope. "This place is supposed to be about joy," he said to the assembled media and dignitaries. It's supposed to be where families come to forget their troubles and just be happy together. What happened here was wrong. But what we've built from it, the conversations, the changes, the commitment to doing better, that gives me hope that my little sister's kids will grow up in a world where their race doesn't make them suspects in their own lives. The economic recovery took longer than anyone had hoped. Some businesses never reopened, and some families never recovered from the financial devastation. But the tourism industry gradually rebuilt itself, strengthened by new policies promoting diversity and inclusion, by training programs that helped workers recognize and address unconscious bias, and by a community that had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about itself. Karen served her full sentence, emerging from prison to find her old life completely transformed. Her husband had divorced her. Her children had changed their last name, and her former friends had moved on without her. The restitution payments would continue for the rest of her life, a monthly reminder of the destruction her prejudices had caused. But even Karen's story had moments of redemption. In her final year of prison, she began working with a civil rights organization, speaking to groups about the dangers of racial profiling and unconscious bias. Her testimony, delivered with the humility of someone who had lost everything to her own prejudices, carried a power that academic presentations could not match. "I destroyed lives because I was afraid of people who didn't look like me," she told a gathering of law enforcement officers. "I turned an innocent child into a terrorist in my mind, because that was easier than examining my own biases. The cost of my ignorance was measured in millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs. But the real cost was to the trust that holds our communities together." Marcus graduated from college with honors, his commencement speech focusing on the transformative power of truth and reconciliation. He spoke about the importance of believing in second chances while holding people accountable for their actions, about the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds when communities commit to honest self-examination. The last scene of this story takes place 5 years after that August day, when sirens shattered the magical atmosphere of Wonderland. Marcus, now a law student specializing in civil rights, returns to the park with his girlfriend and Keisha, who is 17 and preparing for her own college applications. They ride the same rides that had been shut down that day, eat funnel cake at the same stand where their parents had waited anxiously, and take selfies in front of the carousel where Karen had made her fateful decision to let fear override compassion. As they walk through the park, Marcus notices the plaques that now mark significant moments in civil rights history, the diverse faces of employees and visitors, the training materials visible in staff areas, reminding workers about bias and inclusion. The changes are imperfect, incomplete, but real. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if that woman hadn't called the police?" Keisha asks, as they wait in line for the Ferris wheel. Marcus considers the question seriously. "I think about it all the time. We would have had a fun day, gone home with good memories, and nothing would have changed. Sometimes I think the hardest part isn't what happened to me, but thinking about all the people it happens to who don't get national news coverage, who don't get justice, who just have to live with the knowledge that their existence makes some people afraid." The Ferris wheel carries them high above the park, offering a view of the entire complex spread out below, like a miniature world of bright colors and moving parts. From this height, the people below look small but purposeful. Families creating memories, teenagers falling in love, children experiencing wonder for the first time. "It's beautiful," Keisha says, and Marcus knows she's not just talking about the view. She's talking about the possibility of a world where a black teenager can take his medicine without being seen as a threat, where families can pursue happiness without fear, where communities can learn from their mistakes and build something better from the wreckage of their failures. as the sun sets over Wonderland, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflect off the park's colorful attractions. Marcus takes out his inhaler and uses it without hesitation, without looking around to see who might be watching, without the hypervigilance that had defined the months following his arrest. It's a small act of defiance against the fear that had once threatened to define his life. A quiet declaration that he refuses to be made small by other people's prejudices. The park's closing announcements begin to play, reminding visitors that all good things must come to an end, at least for today. But as Marcus and his family make their way toward the exit, past the bronze plaque that commemorates the day when one woman's hatred nearly destroyed a community, but ultimately made it stronger, he carries with him the knowledge that some stories don't really end. They just transform into new beginnings, written by people brave enough to believe that tomorrow can be different from yesterday, that justice delayed is not always justice denied, and that the arc of the moral universe, though long, does indeed bend toward hope.